we have an opportunity here to at least have some discussions among those bridge engineers so that we can work our way toward this management aspect of MAP 21. I think many of you have heard in the State of the Union address that the President did address the need to repair and rehabilitate our deficient bridges, and he recommended a Fix It First program. I think that's key as we move forward, and there's going to be an awful lot of opportunities for the bridge engineers to affect that on a national level. Today, I think we'll see a little bit about MAP 21 and what the requirements of MAP 21 are going to require each state to do, with MAP 21 focusing on our highways. So focusing on, of course, a performance-based plan and standard for bridge conditions. You know, the MAP 21 is requiring us to maintain the sufficient bridges in our inventory below 10% as measured by deck area. So I think what we're going to see is timely, not only with respect to MAP 21, but also with respect to the goal of the Subcommittee on Bridges and Structures move forward. So with that, I'll turn it over back over to you, Mint, or Raj, to go ahead and start the presentation. And in the meantime, I'll see if I can get logged in and well.
Okay, thank you, Greg.
Just a reminder to everybody, please make sure your phone is on mute. We've got a lot of people on the line today. I do seem to hear one might not be in the background, so if you could please check your phones and make sure you're on mute, would be great. Thanks.
Thank you, Kelly. Steve, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Steve. For some of you just joining in, Steve is the team leader of the asset management team of the Federal Highway Office of Asset Management. So he's going to tell us all we need to know about asset management and MAP 21. Okay, Steve.
Thank you, man. So I have a number of slides here, and I think the 30 minutes won't be an issue. But I think the key issue I want to bring out is, as the state DOT is developing an asset management plan, you show the bridge community is well linked in and part of the team and pulling it together. And as the state DOT is developing the plan, to have communication with the Federal Highway Division Office, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who will be certifying it. And I think that communication right along the way will help alleviate any issues that could arise later. And I'll try to point that out as I go through the slides here. You know, MAP 21, where we fall under the asset management, is under infrastructure condition. And the item that basically what Greg and Mint alluded to, maintain the highway infrastructure asset system in a state of good repair. You know, I want to make some comments here about rulemaking, and I can't really say exactly what's in the rulemaking, but I will provide you my thoughts, and any input I can have on that is, you know, certainly appreciated. First, the definition of asset management. This is a language right out of MAP 21, and I know a number of years ago, Mary Peters, our former administrator and secretary, said, if state DOT would get an additional $1, I'll say $1 million, where would be the best place to expend that money? And with this definition, you can see where it's trying to tie in, by having a strategic, systematic process. I underline a couple items here that I think are really important, you know, on the bridge and pavement side. And when we talk to our planners, sometimes they're really in the loop, and sometimes they may not be having that communication when you start talking about O&M costs. But it's really jumping on the idea of preservation. Identify a structured sequence of maintenance, preservation, repair, and rehab, and replacement actions that will achieve that state of good repair over the life cycle of the assets. I think a key thing that as you look at the asset management requirement and what we're looking at with the asset management plans is you're looking at managing the physical assets for the cycle, for the long term. Is that 50 years, 100 years? You know your structures. You work with the division, etc. But how you manage them over their life cycle, but preservation being a key part of that. And as we talk a little later about investment strategies, let's come back to that. What MAP 21 is requiring is that each state is required asset management plan for the NHS to improve or preserve the condition of the assets and the performance of the system. And U.S. DOT, Federal Highway, is required to issue a regulation not later than 18 months after the date of enactment. Okay, this took effect October 1st. It's now March 7th, 6th. We're already 5 months in. So I now have less than 13 months to issue the reg. But I think the key item, and I don't know, I'm assuming you're all familiar with this requirement for asset management plans. As I work with a number of states, sometimes the lead is a new asset management position. Sometimes it's the Office of Planning. Sometimes it's the maintenance people. And they generally establish a team. And I think in all cases it's included someone from Bridge. But then again, there are some division states I haven't heard from, and we'll come back to that. I'm going to divert from the MAP 21 requirements for a little bit, just to talk a little bit about what is asset management. Even yesterday I had questions. Well, what's the difference between asset management and performance management? Or I got a bridge management system doing asset management. Let's talk about that a little bit. I hope you walk away from this webinar today also realizing that asset management is a way of doing business. And what the asset management plan is going to do is document that way of business. How are decisions made? And I know DOTs have a lot of this already between tips, business plans, the state financial plan. There's different pieces. The goal and intent is to pull all those pieces. And how are decisions being made for bridges, pavements? And what about those other physical assets? I know some of you may also be responsible for the culverts in your state, earth retaining structures, high mast signs. Are they going to be addressed? We'll talk about that. And the key focusing again is managing for the whole life of the assets. I'm focusing on the first bullet here. Yeah, all organizations manage the assets, but not all use a good asset management framework. I'll take on the pavement people for a minute, and then I'll make a comment on the bridge side. Federal Highway out every several years about the use of the pavement management system. And I can say all but 2 states indicate the pavement management system. 2 indicated they did not. But there were like 5 or 6 that said they still do a worst first scenario. If you're doing a worst first scenario, you're not really following an asset management framework. Are you putting the best investment in that's going to last the long term? And that's the key. In asset management, something along the line of the quality system that some of us may be familiar with, such as the Baldwin system. I know Federal Highway had quite an effort in that 10, 15 years ago. But it's the plan, implement, evaluate framework of look at how you're doing it, how are decisions being made, are you documenting it, now you're going back and looking at it. Looking at a bridge example. I know some states have been doing preservation measures for quite a while for bridges, pavements. You know if you're really getting your money's worth out of them. How much additional life are you getting? And are you tracking that as far as your deterioration curves? And that ties back to that framework and how decisions are being made using even the information from the management systems. I know I was in one state recently, and hopefully the asset management plan will address this. But the intent is, as you go through the strategies I'll talk about in a few minutes, what you're getting out of the asset management plan ties into your STIP and long-term plan. One of the states I was in recently, we asked the question, do you use your bridge management system? Absolutely. The project coming out of the bridge management system aligned with the STIP, and the response was absolutely not. Well, it was aligned with that particular state STIP where
like this, Alex.
It was a kind of a wish list, and hopefully the asset management plan is a good tool to use as you work with top leadership, state legislature, the public, and others. These are how we're making decisions. What makes asset management strategic? It focuses on the strategic goals of the agency and performance measures and system performance. You know, for division office people and the state DOT people on the line, one of the key items that you'll see in a moment that need to be addressed in an asset management plan is, does the state DOT have strategic goals that address the performance of, in this case, bridges? And does the state have performance measures and targets for bridges? I mentioned earlier about the percent of bridge debt. It may have another measure. And is it documented and understood? And at the end of the day, the asset management plan is to address other assets. We'll get into that in a moment. And looking at a value for money and whole life, it should be addressed as we go through the plan. I'm going to focus on 5 core questions for a moment. And I'm sure with bridges, based on NBI, your own state system, you can certainly tell me where your bridges are and the state of your bridges. You know how they're performing, and I imagine you know how they should be performing. And are there any assets more critical than others? Coming down to O&M costs and long-term funding strategy. An item that we're talking about, and we'll see if it gets legs. Do you have a value for your bridges? If you're looking at a financial plan, some of the best practices abroad, you know, going a step further than GASB is, what is the net worth of my system? Bridges, pavements, and other assets. Often states do use a straight line deterioration for value. Some may not. But I know a comment that's been made by some is the value of the system today more than what it was 5 years ago? And if it isn't, is the way that you're enhancing this condition of the system that can be addressed? What is the demand for services? Are there any regulatory requirements? Well, in that 21, you saw one for bridges. And how are you actually performing? What's the likelihood of failure? Cost to repair. Let me go back for a moment here. In looking at the issue of risk, and I know bridge engineers, you look at risk on every bridge on a project level, but programmatically does the agency look at risk? I'm going to give an example, and I believe it's from New Jersey, and I believe it was for a local road in New Jersey. And maybe I'm adding something to the story to tell a better story. But there was a local bridge. It got posted. Well, that bridge carried several buses a day. Now the alternate route was quite a few miles. Was it 20 miles or more? When decisions were made on what bridge should get the work done, does risk to that sort of factor, should the buses and the kind of traffic they carried been addressed? We can talk about O&M and capital improvements, but the bottom line of the asset management plan, does the state DOT have a strategy for long-term funding? The asset management plan will be laying out that long-term funding strategy for pavements and bridges. TAMs are developed for managing the organization infrastructure so as to cost-effectively achieve the organization's strategic goals in the long term. I'm going to quickly focus on this long-term item, and I'm very sensitive to it. And I'll say this is a big difference unless you define performance management for the long term. Good performance management for the short term may not lead to good asset management. Asset management is looking at the long term. And as you work with your division office, please be sure to communicate that issue if it arises. Asset management plans are under the National Highway Performance Program. Process is certified by Federal Highway, recertified every 4 years. In the asset management plans, states must include pavements and bridges, but they are encouraged to include other infrastructure assets. I know in the case, I've seen a preliminary asset management plan that just laid out something from North Dakota. I believe they're looking at retroreflectivity of signs. And when I was in Minnesota last week, I don't know if they're going to include it in the asset management plan, but there was a good bit of dialogue on safety assets. I know Colorado has talked about facilities, rest areas. But how are these other assets going to pull in? Or I'll raise the issue of large culverts. But that's a DOT decision on what you have data on. And the asset management plan will include strategies that lead to a program of projects that also make progress toward achievement of the state targets for asset condition and performance of the NHS, realizing the performance management requirements that are also included in Map 21. What's in the asset management plan? It must include the pavement and bridge inventory in the condition of pavements and bridges on the NHS, and what are the objectives and measures overall for asset management and for the pavements and bridges, and identification of any performance gaps. Because I think, one more key thing to walk away from. If your agency doesn't have these, please start having the dialogue and have the dialogue with the lead for your agency on developing the asset management plan. And I don't know in all states, is there a similar strategy for pavements and bridges, but start having that dialogue of how you're going to move ahead. Life cycle cost and risk. Looking at it from the programmatic and enterprise level. I'll talk about risk in more detail in a moment. Developing a financial plan. And I know all state DOTs have financial plans today. I know financial plans are required as part of the long-term planning process. But the very intent of what we have here in the asset management plans are, I know as I look at some of the long-term financial plans, it's not based on any real data. I don't know in some cases if they're using information out of the bridge management system. The intent being that the financial plan that comes out of the asset management plan is based on the revenue the state has received in the past and what they expect in the future, based on real numbers. And as you look at investment strategies in your performance, you're looking at the expected resources and the condition of your assets. I know I often get the question of, wait a minute, Steve. A state is in dire straits financially. It's going to be very difficult to improve the condition of our pavements and bridges. And other assets, something's going to give. I'd say the asset management plan is where you lay out that strategy of how you're going to do that. And like I mentioned earlier, please have that dialogue with your Federal Highway Division office of what is the strategy. And you see there, parentheses, preservation. Under investment strategies, please address preservation. What are your preservation strategy as an agency when it comes to bridges? In one state, the issue came up of, they start looking at the districts. Not all districts are looking at their pavements and bridges the same way. Hopefully the asset management plan lays out that strategy that they may be treated more similarly. And as they look at it from district to district, it may mean some moving of numbers. I know the question came up of, well, historically, we give X amount of money to each district and it's based on certain factors. I'm certainly sensitive to political issues, but if you start looking at what's coming out of your management system, looking at condition, looking at funding levels, the asset management plan may explain why some of those historical funding scenarios may need to change a little. Examples of risk. Funding. Do you expect to get the same funding levels in the future? Reputation. I'll give an example of, let's say a bridge fails. Can the agency live with having another bridge failure? They'll probably move a lot of money into bridges so it really doesn't hurt their reputation. I'll give the Minnesota example, I-35W. To the best of my knowledge, after the failure, they moved some money. They took some money out of pavement. They moved it to bridges. Reputation, bridge condition were certainly influencing factors. And they let the pavement condition slip some. So they were watching those numbers the whole time also and making the decision, looking at those deterioration curves. When, at what point do they say enough is enough as to where the money is? And the asset management lay that all out. I'm going to give another example of risk. And I'm going to give a California example. And I know we looked at California's numbers in the past for bridges. And when you look at percent of bridge deck area, California's numbers are not near the top as being having the bridge decks in the best condition. Our office was visited California. California CalCan came back at us and said, we're making decisions through seismic retrofit. It's a very important item for us. I'd come back and say, looking at risk, it certainly is a very important one. He said, we're watching our decks. We're looking at the condition of our bridges overall. We're putting money into seismic retrofit. That's how we're making decisions. We don't have this written in an asset management plan, so they didn't have an asset management plan yet, but they certainly could have. That sort of strategy certainly makes sense to me on how and why Caltrans did what they did, but the asset management plan would spell that out to address those very issues. And I certainly got to raise the issue of extreme events, storms, and climate change. What's happening? You know your state a lot better than I do, and I'm not here to debate is climate change taking place or not. I know we have some states that say it certainly is, and there's a high priority issue. Others, it may not be one. But I certainly see, I hear a lot about extreme events more now in 2012, 2013 than I did 10 years ago. How does that affect the bridges, the culverts? You all know your state better than I do. And looking at vulnerability, risk, I certainly recommend addressing that in the asset management plan. The requirements of MAP 21 says federal highway in consultation with the state. The state's going to establish the process to develop the plans, and they must have a plan consistent with the process by the second fiscal year. Otherwise, the federal share for NHPP will be reduced It's only 65% match. In the process certification, state DOT leadership approves the plan, the division office certifies it. The rulemaking for asset management will also address bridge management systems and pavement management systems. Not getting into too much detail, if you look at what's in 23 CFR 500 today, of what a bridge management system should be able to do, that's what's going to the requirement. Our intent is that the requirement is similar to what you find in the 23 CFR 500 today, where it's an inventory, condition, has deterioration curves, it runs life cycle analysis, it comes up with various funding scenarios. I know as you hear various questionnaires and surveys that have been done in the last years, if I talk to Wade Casey or others on Mint's team, we know every state has a good inventory, but we also know a lot of states are not using their bridge management system, be it Pontus or some other system. In all the analyses, you may want to start looking at that. Surface transportation program, I said the asset management plan must include pavements and bridges on the NHS. A state can develop the asset management plan to include all public roads. And there are funding implications with this too. The states can use the NHPP or STP funding for data collection, new management systems, etc. But again, state DOT work with the division office, etc. Yes, the key point is the asset management plan is laying out how the DOT does business and the key items: preserve assets to minimize their whole life cost, operate in a financially sustainable manner, and the asset management plan will lay out the framework to improve performance on a long-term basis. I'll come back to my other comment again. I realize some states, there are some financial issues, but this can be used as a tool with some decision makers in legislature to get more funds. From what I hear, Utah and North Carolina has been successful with the information from their management systems and the asset management programs and presentations to the legislature to get more funds. What should be taking place now? Okay, the status of my rulemaking is I'm working with our legal office, and I'm in the process of doing a cost-benefit analysis that should be available by the end of the month. At that point, the rulemaking will go to the Office of the Secretary and then to the Office of Management and Budget. Hopefully, it'll be on the street summer 2013. I'm working with a legal office, like I said, with the rulemaking. It's been there a couple months, and we're working out details. I know as you work with your legal office, write language and all, it's a very time-consuming process. You should be being sure that you have a good listing of your pavement and bridge assets. Are there other assets you want to include in the plan? Are there targets for bridges? Is your management system more than an inventory? Looking at the life cycle strategies for sustaining the infrastructure. You know, you have time for having the asset management plan developed. But I know sometimes these issues like risk, long-term life cycle costs, etc. It takes time for these things to take place in an agency. In fact, I know a couple agencies have come back at us. Can you help us with a gap analysis of where we are? If you go to the AASHTO Asset Management Guide, there is a very good tool for state DOT to do a self-assessment. There's an NTHRP study being undertaken on a gap analysis. So I recommend the state DOTs look at the self-assessment and do it as an agency as you move ahead in developing the plan. We hold webinars on a monthly basis. We call it the Asset Management Guide Book Club. More information on that can be found on the SHWA Asset Management website. We also hold other webinars on every couple months in cooperation with the AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management. The subcommittee is chaired by the Secretary of Transportation from Florida and Tim Henko, the Vice Chair out of Minnesota. We have NHI training. We have Introduction to Asset Management. The course was in New York right before Christmas. This week, just finished today, it was in Connecticut. We have a new course, Development of Asset Management Plans, that was piloted last week in Minnesota, and it should be available in about a month's time to everyone. And we're going to have a web-based asset management course, a 1-hour one, Introduction to Development of Asset Management Plans. And we're also leading this to some asset summits that will probably be taking place in the fall. So, and at the summit, you know, and who's going to be there from the state DOTs? Is it an asset management coordinator? Is it a pavement and bridge guy? When you start coming down to numbers, I really appreciate what Mick did in organizing this call, because it may not be the bridge person that's asked to be at the meeting. Or another issue that comes up. I know Andrew Williams from Ohio DOT contacted me, and Martin Kindner from Wyoming DOT. A lot of issues of data in GIS and how that's used by the state, and what is the best practice. We're going to likely put together a peer exchange as soon as I can put a contract together for it and invite 8 or 10 states. What kind of address issues like this? We normally have a final report, and we post the results up on the SHWA Asset Management website. Bottom line is, it's key for an agency to have a champion. Bridge engineers, you know who the champion is in your agency, and if there isn't one, start having a dialogue, please. But it really seems to mean a lot. I know with Director Lewis in Rhode Island, State Highway Director in New Hampshire, Tim Henko in Minnesota, we have programs that are really got a lot of energy behind them. The Secretary from Florida, the New York's head. But when you don't have that champion, I don't hear much from a number of states. And I think, you know, these are all good issues too, are important.
Mr. Don?
Resources are available. Every state DOT received 10 copies of the AASHTO Asset Management Guide and at AASHTO. Every Federal Highway Division office received a copy from the Office of Asset Management, Butch Velasquez, myself. If you have any questions specific to asset management, you can contact Butch, myself, or Nostra. So that simply, you know, work through Mint and Raj, and it'll get back to me. At this point, Mick, let me turn it back to you, and we can do questions or answers, or you and Greg can. I'd certainly like you all to add to what I said, if you'd like.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve, for the very fine presentation. At this time, let's open up for questions.
Right now, we don't have any questions on the screen, so if anybody has any questions or for any of us, you can type your question into the Q&A tab at the top of your screen. Still not seeing any. Maybe, is there any other comments or questions, Greg, that you might have?
Kelly, let me just start out by thanking Steve for his presentation this morning. I think this is a very timely discussion that we're having, a timely discussion that we're having with our bridge and our FHWA partners. I think we as bridge professionals are going to be tasked to accomplish the goals and requirements of MAP 21. Just so everybody knows, later this month, the Subcommittee on Bridges and Structures will be updating our strategic plan. And I'm sure as we talk about that strategic plan for the Subcommittee on Bridges and Structures that asset management will play a major role in our revisions to that plan. As Steve talked today, he had an awful lot of discussions on, I think, three things: communication, coordination, and teamwork. And I think today's meeting was really a great first step in communicating the needs for a robust asset management plan in the bridge community. Not only do we need to communicate within our agencies, the states, the RFHWA partners, but others in the bridge community as well. And we can't exclude the public and our state legislators. They're the ones who are expecting the results. So we have to keep that in the back of our mind as we move forward as well. Coordination and teamwork within these groups, I believe, is extremely important. The state bridge engineers and the bridge engineering community, we're the ones that are being looked to provide input in the future direction of asset management of our bridges. I think we need to coordinate and collaborate on the appropriate inspection processes. And I think we have the people on the line today. We have those technical groups that are out there doing that every day to say this is what we need to do to ensure that we have a robust inspection process so that we can accurately identify the conditions of our bridges. Because if we don't have a good handle on what the condition of our bridges is, and a deterioration for those bridges, a basis for the deterioration of those bridges, it's going to be very difficult to measure and report our progress on the condition of our bridges to the public and the legislature. Toward that end, I think we need to focus on achieving a few vital goals and setting with limits set for our performance measures. And I think that's going to be an upcoming task that we're all going to be asked to participate in. But I think from our state's perspective, as we work through this effort, we all, I think, are going to be asked to more cost-effectively improve the condition of our bridges. We simply, in Wyoming, just don't have the funds to address all of our needs. And as I think back about what the President said, fix it first, that's going to really be a struggle with preventative maintenance. Fix it first. Is it worst first, or is it a preventative maintenance approach that we're going to take? But we have to consider both of those and couple those with a variety of strategies and funding constraints, because this is really going to be a tough nut for us to crack to ensure the long-term viability of our infrastructure. So I guess maybe just to kind of sum up my comments, I would encourage each of you on the phone today to think about this. Think about the roles that you all have in asset management, whether it's the inspection process, measuring it, coming up with various scenarios on how are we going to address our needs with our limited funding, and then to share your thoughts and concerns, the challenges that you might have with your division administrators or your state bridge engineers, because we, through your efforts, that's going to be essential to shape the future of bridge asset management. I think working together, we can make this a viable tool to ensure the success of the bridge engineering community and of the infrastructure of the United States. That's all I have, Kelly.
Okay. Well, we do have. Oh, I'm sorry, Matt. We do have a few questions.
Any questions, Kelly, from the chat box?
Yeah. One of the first questions is just where will this presentation be available? Is that going to be posted on the Federal Highway site, Matt?
You have recorded the webinar, so it can be posted on your site or Federal Highway site.
Okay, I can. I'll send out an email when I post it, and it will go to everybody. The next question was, will the USDOT take state input in development of minimum standards and performance measures?
Steve can help answer this question.
Well, USDOT takes state input in development of minimum standards and performance measures. This is not the reg that I'm responsible for. This is the one that, on performance measures, that Pete Stefanos, who's the Director of Performance Management, is leading. But they are going through the rulemaking process, and I believe the bridge notice of proposed rulemaking will come out an anticipated date of right after the new year in that 10 months, new year of 2014, where yes, you will be able to comment. And I know they've had quite a few listening sessions. Go to the Federal Highway Performance Management website. There's a place where you can provide input. So I recommend, you do that.
Okay. We have another question.
Let me add a note to it, I think. Steve, you mentioned that US DOT is going to issue the regulation in 18 months. Then the notice of proposed rulemaking will be in the summer of 2013. So at that time, you will have some.
Yes, the notice of proposed rulemaking for asset management will come out this summer. And let's hope the final rule comes out by April 1st, 2015.
Yeah. So there will be guidance.
2014. And I want to say, at this point, it appears that we're still on schedule.
Good.
Okay.
Kelly, anything else?
The next question. It was stated that the analysis period should be over the long term. Any suggestions on the length of time as a function of asset type or other?
Well, I'll say something and then I'll ask you all a question. So we're talking today a financial plan for the state of about 10 years. But among the states, what is the right analysis period? Is it 50 years? Is it longer? Then, I'll ask you or Greg to answer that one. What are other states using as an analysis period?
Let's pose this question to the participants, see what are the practices out there.
They're probably not going to talk because I told them to keep their phones muted.
Oh, okay. Right.
There are about 105 people on right now, so it might not be a good idea to open up the phone. So maybe it's something that we could provide feedback on through email or through other contact.
Okay. You can write the answers to the question.
Oh, yeah, we can do that. We can put together some minutes. The next question was about the DOT is receiving 10 copies of the AASHTO Asset Management Guide, and I can answer that one. And yes, for every AASHTO publication, DOTs always receive 10 free copies of every new publication, and those actually go to your CEO's, your secretary, or your commissioner's office. So if you haven't seen them, then that's where they usually go.
It's available in the bookstore, AASHTO bookstore.
It's also available in the AASHTO bookstore, yes. So then we have another question. I believe performance measures for bridges are only applicable to the NHS. How and or when is asset management going to be applied to the non-NHS bridges?
There's no requirement for that with the asset management plan. But, me sitting where I am, seeing I'm the team leader for asset management, I believe if the asset management plan is truly the document that a state DOT uses to manage the assets, why don't you just include them all right up front and use that as the basis of your decision making? No, and I'll give an example. It's not to say all bridges are created equal either. Maybe the thresholds of your performance target for non-NHS or lower volume may be different than NHS. But if the asset management plan is directly related to how the DOT expends their money, I'd recommend it includes your whole system. But that's not a requirement. There's no, MAP 21 does not say what the requirement is. I cannot answer and say, X years from now it'll be required. I do not see that coming.
Okay. I'll just move on to the next question. How was the 10% deficient bridge performance measure on the NHS determined?
I think that's a question for you, Mint.
Yeah. Is Tom on the line?
I'm here, Mint.
You want to give an answer to that, Tom?
Sure. We would take the MBI data that the states provide us once a year, and we'll first determine if a bridge meets the actually deficient, just as we have for many years, and then we'll calculate the area for those structures. So it's a fairly straightforward calculation. We're going to look at it over a 3-year period, beginning with April 2014 data submittal. And if you're over for all 3 of those years, then the penalty would be applied.
That's a very good answer.
So we're ready to move on. There was a question about the definition of the state of good repair. If you can elaborate on that.
I'll tell you at this point, we are not defining yet in the rulemaking for asset management. It may be defined elsewhere. I would say the state of good repair, are directly tied to the 10% or the measure that the state DOT is working with to meet the federal requirements or some other agreement between them and the division office that could be tighter. The next question was, will U.S. DOT develop a standard format for an asset management plan? I'd go back to, give me a moment. The asset management plan address each of those items. If you go to the AASHTO Asset Management Guide, I'll focus on implementation. Some outlines are included in there, and information will be coming out from the pilot projects of templates that are being used by New York, Louisiana, and Minnesota. It says here, there was a comment that Colorado uses 10 years for the deficit report and 20 years for asset management discussions when they have them with the commission. Give me a moment. Is the most recent asset management guide the AASHTO one from January 2011? Yes, it is. Yeah, the AASHTO guide is a very good document. Like we see the section on asset management plan, they need some enhancement. And there's an NCHRP project that's going to address that. But between looking at the items on the SHWA asset management website and the AASHTO subcommittee on asset management website, it's a pretty good resource of information on the subject. I see it's almost 5 of. Greg and Vince, let me turn it back to y'all.
Okay, Kelly has any more questions?
No, it looks like we're all set with the questions, and of course we can entertain questions later by email. I'm sorry, there is one more. There is one more question. Is there any plan to use element level analysis in determining the state of good repair?
I'll turn that to Tom.
Well, no, not at this time. Ideally, in the future, that's where we want to be, but we don't have any element level data, and we're a ways off from having that. So at this time, I think the best answer is no, we have no plans to use element data.
Okay, Min, so I think we're all set with the questions if you want to wrap up.
Okay, yeah. Greg, you have any more thoughts for us? You have given us some very good comments and some things to think about.
No, again, Mint, I think that we just need to continue to communicate what we see as a bridge engineering community to make this a viable process so that we can implement a preventative maintenance program to meet the goals. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to wrap up, I think for more information, I think just like Steve has mentioned, that you can visit the FHWA MAP 21 website. There's a lot of information on that website. And then you want to study more about the requirements of MAP 21, you can look at section 1106 of MAP, so you get full coverage of the and requirements. So here again, thank you very much, Kelly, for moderating the session. Present.
No idea how to turn the beep. I apologize. I'm sorry for all the beeping. I don't know how to turn the beep off.
I think we just already wrapped up the session.
Next time I'll get more used to the system before we do the webinar. I only had yesterday.
So I think it worked out pretty well. I think we get the message across and then information exchange of Q&As. All your help. See you next time.
Okay, thank you guys.
All right.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Appreciate it.